And we start with a Fox News alert. Israel is signaling plans for a broader offensive in Gaza as it continues to hammer Hamas targets.
All right, the fragile ceasefire ending over the terror group's refusal to release the remaining hostages, including American Idon Alexander.
Trey Yingst is live from Israel with the latest. Good morning, Trey.
Hey guys, good morning. Overnight, Israel went back to war against Hamas, launching dozens of airstrikes throughout the Gaza Strip. Massive explosions rocked major population centers, including Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. We know many people were killed, though Fox News cannot independently confirm the exact number. Among the dead are reported to be numerous senior Hamas officials, including Issam al-Da'alis, who was acting as one of the de facto leaders of Hamas. Funerals were held this morning for some of the dead. We know that many are civilians. The question now is if this will continue. National Security Council spokesman Brian Hughes said in a statement, quote, Hamas could have released hostages to extend the ceasefire, but instead chose refusal and war. Hamas declined to accept a previous ceasefire proposal put forward by the Trump administration. And right now, there are indications that Israel could be preparing to enter Gaza on the ground. Evacuation orders were given this morning, with the IDF releasing a map for Palestinians to leave the entirety of the Gaza border area. Israeli officials quoted in local media today are telling Hamas to release the remaining hostages for the firing to stop. Israel clearly changing their negotiation tactics here. Looking at the situation in both Doha and Cairo, they're trying to put new pressure on Hamas to free the remaining Israelis held inside Gaza. Guys?
What's the sense, Trey, inside the country? They feel as though this is overdue, or is there more angst about the hostages?
So there are two parts to this. This is a little bit of inside baseball, but it's very important here. We just learned last hour that the Jewish Power Party, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the country's former national security minister, will be rejoining the government coalition. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has to pass a budget next week, and this is going to allow him to do so. The other thing to look at here is the hostages. There are 59 hostages still being held by Hamas inside Gaza. They were dragged into the Strip against their will on the morning of October 7th, and 24 of them are believed to be alive. And we've spoken with so many of the hostages who were released from Hamas captivity, from Hen Alma Goldstein, from Kfar Aza, to Shani Gorin from Nir Oz. To recently, I spoke with Nama Levy, one of those surveillance soldiers who was released during this ceasefire that went into effect due to the pressure from the Trump administration. And they all have something in common. You look into their eyes and see the terror that they experienced being held as hostages. And you think about the 24 living hostages that are still there, including Idon Alexander, an American citizen, and what they must be going through. And so there's a lot of frustration among the families of the hostages about this war resuming. They are concerned that this could lead to them being killed. And they're also concerned that Hamas is not agreeing to any sort of deal that will get them freed from Gaza. And so as we look forward, the hope here is that this will lead to some sort of agreement to stop the war. At the end of the day, the people who are paying the highest price, it is the hostages that remain inside Gaza and the Palestinian civilians who are being killed by the dozens as this war resumes.
Now, Trey, we got word last week that Idon Alexander, the American from New Jersey, was going to be released. What happened with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So without getting too into the details here of what's been taking place in Doha as these negotiations continue, President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, basically proposed a deal to Israel and Hamas that would see a two-phased deal. 11 living hostages set to be released in the first phase, and this would ultimately allow both Israel and Hamas to slowly but surely enter into phase 2 of a broader ceasefire agreement. Hamas rejected that deal that was put forward by the Trump administration and basically agreed to a deal of their own to release all of the bodies of American citizens that are currently being held inside Gaza and the final living American, Idon Alexander. This was seen by Israeli officials and Trump administration officials as a spin by Hamas, trying to pressure negotiators and also trying to drive a wedge between the Israelis and the Americans. And so we did see that statement. We reported it out. But again, what we are looking at here is likely some sort of proposal on the table that remains. And at this hour, we do understand, according to Arab media, that negotiators are trying to say to Hamas, look, you have an opportunity to again come to the table and release the hostages. And this is the only way that this is going to basically give you an exit ramp and end what is now starting to become another major operation against the organization in control of Gaza.
So, Trey, what do the family... This is a tough spot for any family member to be in because you want the hostages, you want your loved one home with you. But then you see Israel's point of view, which is Hamas is not negotiating in good faith. They're not releasing. They haven't stuck with any of the guidelines in the past deals that were reached. And so are they upset with the Israeli government, or are they supportive of these measures now?
So actually here in Israel, there are a lot of key disagreements about how to move forward with all of this. We saw overnight some of the hostages that were actually freed from Gaza and the families of those that remain inside the Strip posting broken hearts to social media and releasing statements of frustration about the war resuming, because there is real concern that this will ultimately lead to the deaths of the remaining hostages inside Gaza. But you raise a very important point here. Hamas has not negotiated in good faith, and it has led to a very challenging situation for negotiating teams and for President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. As they look at what's being presented, there is only one option, according to the Trump administration officials who are dealing with these ceasefire conversations, and that is a future for Gaza that does not have Hamas in control. And so they are encouraging Hamas to agree to a ceasefire, ultimately lay down their weapons, and release the remaining hostages. But the situation that we're looking at right now is incredibly dire, because if they don't do that, Israel is committed to continuing the war against Hamas. And as a result, many Palestinian civilians that are inside Gaza, remember, there are more than 2 million people inside the Strip, will be killed as a result. And so there are no winners in all of this. And again, at the focus here, the center of all of this, the remaining hostages, 59 of them that have been held by Hamas, this organization in Gaza, since the morning of October 7th.
Right.
Guys?
And Trey, final question for you. Clearly, the Israelis completely dialed in the White House. We had heard that they were consulting with the White House. And you were speaking of the Arab media. I'm looking at the Jerusalem Post. And apparently, Israel coordinated this attack with the United States after we hit Yemen. So it was going to be a 1-2 punch.
It's not surprising. There is incredibly close coordination happening right now between the Israeli government and the Trump administration, because when you think about the threats currently taking place in the Middle East, it's not just inside Gaza with groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but it's also the Houthis in Yemen, who committed to firing once again on Israel with ballistic missiles and drones if the war inside Gaza resumed. But then you have Iran-backed organizations in places like Iraq and Syria that have participated in this conflict over the past 17 months. And then, of course, Iran-backed Hezbollah in southern Lebanon that still, this far into the conflict, has the capability to launch rockets and missiles into Israel. And so the Trump administration is looking at this in a holistic way. They're taking a 360 approach, trying to not only support their key ally in the region, Israel, but also ensure that American vessels in the Red Sea, for example, are not targeted by these Iranian proxies such as the Houthis. A lot of moving parts here, but as the war inside Gaza resumes, the big question here, as Benjamin Hall mentioned earlier on Fox and Friends, will the Iranians get involved, and how will the Iranians be a part of all of this? We saw that statement yesterday from the President of the United States, basically warning Iran that if they do not stop funding and supporting these proxy organizations that have launched attacks not only on Israel, but also on American forces in the region, there will be consequences. Guys?
And by the way, there's an unconfirmed report
Thank you, Trey.
That they've taken out the spy ship that Iran had in the Red Sea that's been sitting there for 3 years, offering coordinates to the Houthis to take out the merchant ships. That it was sunk.
All right.
So
All
hopefully
coordinated.
that'll be it. That shows you there's a new sheriff in town.
All right.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.